Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Firstly, apologies for the sound of my voice as I'm a little bit under the weather at the moment. Today we are looking at the Soviet Union's first successful hijacking, that of Aeroflot Flight 244, which also represented the first time a crew member was killed during a Soviet hijacking. Aeroflot, the national airline of the Soviet Union and today the national airline of Mother Russia, Flight 244 was operated by an Antonov An-24b, registered CCP 46256, and built in 1967. The Antonov An-24b is a 44-seat twin turboprop passenger aircraft produced from 1959 until 1979 by the Soviet Union, with 1,367 built. The flight departed from Batumi in modern-day Georgia, then the Georgian SSR, for Krasnodar, the largest city and administrative centre of Krasnodar Krai, located in modern-day southern Russia, via Sukhumi in the Georgian SSR. The first leg would be approximately 30 minutes. The crew aboard were pilot Georgy Chakaika, first officer Suliko Shavidizek, flight mechanic Hovanez Babayan, navigator Valery Fadev, and flight attendant Nazarjena Kushenkov. There were 46 passengers aboard Flight 244. Lithuanian citizens 45-year-old Pranas Brazinskas and his 13-year-old son Algirdas were on board the An-24b and both seated in the first row of the aircraft. Pranas was born in Byzanyos in 1924 in modern-day Lithuania and fought for Nazi Germany as part of the auxiliary troops in 1944. He was active in the so-called Forest Brothers, an armed national liberation front operating from 1944 to 1956 in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and aimed to fight the Soviet Union and gain independence for the free Baltic states. He supplied the Forest Brothers with weapons. In 1955 he was convicted of abuse of office, however the details of exactly what he did are unclear, and he was sentenced to 1 year of correctional labour in a gulag. In the same year, on the 26th of July, his son was born. Released in 1956, he then worked as a store manager before being sentenced for theft of property and spent 5 years in jail. Released under amnesty, his family then settled in Kokand in modern-day Uzbekistan in 1970. He then got married and changed his last name to Koyevokh. However, in 1970, for unknown reasons, the KGB became interested in him, and he decided that it was time to flee the Soviet Union. However, this was not doable as Soviet citizens could not leave the country. As a result, the father and son decided to flee the country, and the duo aimed to hijack the An-24b and defect to the west. They boarded the Aeroflot Flight on the 15th of October 1970 in Batumi with a sawn-off shotgun and a hand grenade as well as a pistol. 5 minutes after takeoff from Batumi with the aircraft at 800 meters, they called over the sole flight attendant, Nadezhda Kushenkov, and handed an envelope with a note which they demanded was given to Chakakiak. The note was a printed message which stated, Order number 9. 1. I order you to stop flying along the specified route. 2. Stop radio communication. 3. For failure to comply with an order. Death. Free Europe. PKZTS. General Krylov. Kushenko ran into the cockpit and shouted, Attack! The Brazinskas ran in after her. Algirdas shouted, Nobody get up, otherwise we'll blow up the plane. Kushenko tried to block the Brazinskas from going into the cockpit, shouting, You can't go there, warning to the pilots, they are armed. They then shot her twice at point-blank range, killing her. The Brazinskas continued to shoot, firing a total of 24 shots, wounding an unnamed passenger as well as Babayan and seriously wounding Chakakia, who was shot in the spine by a bullet and left paralysed, as well as Fadiv. Making it into the cockpit, the pilots were ordered to fly to Trabzon in the Black Sea region of Turkey, 175 kilometers or 109 miles as the crow flies from Batumi, and approximately 13 minutes by plane. Turkey joined NATO in 1952 and was to all intents and purposes on the side of the United States of America during the Cold War, while the Truman Doctrine of 1947 proclaimed the importance of keeping Turkey and Greece as non-communist governments. It did not play a major role during the Cold War. During this time, Pranas remained in the cockpit, while Agridas remained in the cabin, keeping passengers at bay. Passengers attempted to overcome the hijackers, however, Agridas shot at them. The crew attempted to land the plane at a military airfield in Kobuleti, Georgia, but the hijackers warned that they would blow up the plane if this happened. The plane then arrived in Trabzon, Turkey, and circled the runway, firing green flares asking to be cleared for an emergency landing. The Brazinskars immediately surrendered to Turkish authorities. On the 16th of October, 43 passengers and the body of Kuchenko were returned to the Soviet Union, with the wounded passenger and wounded crew remaining in Trabzon. Chakakia and Fadiz are both undergoing operations before being returned to the Soviet Union. The An-24b would also be returned a few days later to the Soviet Union and re-entered under service with Aeroflot, but with one addition: a portrait of a smiling Kuchenko at the front of the interior of the plane to remember her. Once the plane arrived in Trabzon, the father and son were immediately arrested by police. Despite requests of the pair to be handed over to the Soviet Union, this was refused by the Turkish government. But why did the Turkish government refuse this? Well, if the pair had been returned to the Soviet Union, they would have faced long prison sentences and possibly the death penalty. This was despite the USSR Ministry of Foreign Affairs negotiating for several days for their return. However, the Soviet Union's archenemy, the United States of America, petitioned for the Turkish government to not return the Brazinskars to the Soviet Union, which was primarily spearheaded by the member of the US House of Representatives from Illinois, 4th District, as part of the Republican Party, Ed Derenkiski, a Polish-American who spearheaded for the rights and freedoms of Eastern Europeans under the Soviet Union. As a result, the Brazinskars were tried in Turkey, with Pranas sentenced to 8 years in prison and Algidas to 2 years. However, after just 2 years, the father and son duo were released under an amnesty, remaining under house arrest in Turkey. 4 years later, in 1976, they attempted to claim political refugee status from the Embassy of the United States of America in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, but this was denied. As a result, in the same year, they travelled to Venezuela. 2 months later, they boarded a flight to Canada from Caracas, with a transit stop in New York in the United States of America. Travelling from Caracas to New York, they did not take the rest of the flight and remained illegally in the United States of America. They were both detained. At a press conference on the 21st of March 1978, a US State Department spokesman told a Soviet correspondent that the concern of the United States of America about international terrorism did not extend to the Brazinskars case. In 1982, however, the US State Department announced that their request for political asylum was rejected and they would be repelled from the United States of America. However, the American Federal Immigration and Naturalization Service did not answer the request of the Soviet authorities as to where and when they would be expelled. However, upon appeal, immigration judge Robert Griffin, under the liberalised 1980 Refugee Act, argued that they should be able to reapply for asylum. While political asylum was never granted, they were allowed to remain in the United States of America. This became a true point of contention in Soviet-US relations, with the Soviet Union calling out the hypocrisy of the United States of America in granting asylum to terrorists who had committed murder, with the Soviet government pressing for the Brazinskars to be returned until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The pair wrote a book and tried to justify the hijacking, stated that their actions were a struggle for the liberation of Lithuania from Soviet occupation. Initially living in New York, they moved to Santa Monica, California in 1980, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the 900 block of 21st Street. In 1983, they would be given American passports. Algidas did quite well in adjusting to life in the United States of America, becoming an accountant and marrying US State Department employee Virginia White, herself a descendant of Lithuanian immigrants. As a result, Pranas would become Frank White and Algidas would become Albert Victor White. However, Pranas remained disliked in the United States of America, even amongst the Lithuanian diasporic community of Santa Monica. He refused to learn English and only communicated with Algidas in Russian and Lithuania. Becoming a house painter and a gun dealer, neighbours complained that he was aggressive and threatened physical violence. In 1991, his neighbour, Linda Flett, complained to police that he threatened to kill her. He was even disliked amongst the Lithuanian community when they tried to raise legal funds to pay for their legal costs. They didn't raise anything. Furthermore, Parnas refused to show any sympathy for his actions, and when interviewed by Lithuanian journalist Ruta Grinevikute, when asked about the death of Kurchenko, he would state, "The bitch got in my way." However, Algirdas did the best to support his father, telling kids when his father stared harshly at them, "My father is an old man, please don't make him nervous." However, as the new millennium came along, Parnas became more irritable and began to argue frequently with Algirdas. On the 5th of January 2002, Algirdas got into an argument with Parnas and murdered his 77-year-old father, hitting him over the head 8 times with a dumbbell. This was allegedly provoked when Algirdas threatened to leave his father, and his father pointed a gun at him, threatening to shoot him if he left. However, he didn't call the police until the next day, the 6th of January 2002. Kommersant, a national Russian newspaper, probably put it best in its headline on the 2nd of November 2002, stating, "The first Soviet terrorist died." He was represented by Jack Alex, an American lawyer of Lithuanian descent. In an interview with Moscow newspaper Moskovitch Komsomolets in 2004, he would state, "Parnas was a terrible person. He was a real terrorist. Sometimes, in fits of rage, he would chase the neighbour kids with a weapon. He repeatedly threatened to kill his neighbour." On the 6th of December 2002, Algirdas was sentenced to 16 years in jail, having been jailed for second-degree murder. This was a very low sentence, with the Desert News reporting that had he been charged with first-degree murder, he would have faced between 26 years and life in prison for the murder of his father. Indeed, for second-degree murder, this was the minimum sentence that he could have been given, as this carried a sentence of 16 years to life. An appeal against the sentence in 2004 was unsuccessful, and he was released in 2018. The hijacking and ultimately the death of Kurchenko became a true propaganda spectacle for the Soviet Union. On the 30th of October 1970, she was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Banner for her actions in the hijacking, one of the highest awards in the Soviet Union. Originally from Nokopoltava in Klushkesky district in the Altai region, a school was named after her with a museum created at the school. A second museum was created at the School of Young Pilots in Iskavesk. Furthermore, an obelisk to Kurchenko was erected in the mountains on the border of Abkhazia and the Krasnodar territory. An asteroid was also named after her, as were a number of streets and parks in the Soviet Union. In 1981, an envelope was issued with her face on it. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, she still remains remembered in Mother Russia, with an event dedicated to her 50 years after the hijacking on the 4th of September 2020 in Izhevsk, where 19 pine trees were planted in memory of her. On the 50th anniversary of the hijacking on the 15th of October 2020, memorials took place throughout Mother Russia and principally in the Altai region in memory of Kurchenko, with Alexander Nedako, the then First Deputy Minister of Transport of the Russian Federation and head of the Federal Transport Agency, Razavation, stating, "50 years ago, our country and the whole world learned about the feat of a 19-year-old flight attendant on an Aeroflot An-24 aircraft, who at the cost of her life saved passengers on board the aircraft. She blocked the path of the 2 brutal bandits." Chairman of the government of Udmurtia, Yaroslav Semyonov, would state, "We all need to remember the existence of great truths, duty, service, and the great choice of man, to live for the sake of people." Tatyana Vlodnogodova, an Aeroflot flight attendant and advisor to the director of the Onboard Services Department, would state, "Not everyone can conquer heaven. This required a lot of effort. You need to love people, take care of their comfort and safety. The profession of a flight attendant is serving people. For everyone who chooses this profession, this is already the beginning of a feat." She was initially buried in Sukhumi, however in 1990, due to unrest, her grave was moved to Glazov. The 1973 Soviet song My Clear Star by the group Flowers was dedicated to her, which became highly popular in the Soviet Union, as was the song Nadezhda, written in 1971. The 1974 film Abituenka was directed by Alexei Mushurin and was based on the hijacking of the An-24. Today, the An-24 no longer operates with Aeroflot, and only 93 is still in service, mostly operated by smaller Russian airlines, including UT Air Cargo, Angara Airlines, IR Ario, Yakutia Airlines, as well as North Korea's national airline Air Koryo. Aeroflot continues to use the flight number 244, but it is now used on their direct Moscow-Sheremetyevo to Maher, Seychelles flight, which is operated by an Airbus A330. Batumi Airport is no longer served by Aeroflot, while Krasnodar is served directly from Krasnoyarsk and Moscow-Sheremetyevo in Russia and Yerevan in Armenia by the Russian flag carrier. Sukhumi has been controlled by Abkhazia since the Abkhazian War and remains a disputed territory, with the airport no longer operating commercial flights. However, the next Soviet hijacking would occur just 12 days after the hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 244 on the 27th of October 1970, and we will look at that in a future video, as that one ironically saw the hijackers voluntarily return to the Soviet Union. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know, and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, have an amazing day, and remember the truth is always more interesting than fiction.